Hi everyone, this is our podcast on ESG. I'd like to introduce myself, John Dawson, FCPA, and I have Jim Allenby here from Parvate and Paul Gaudoin. Now, we're going to have a bit of a chat about ESG. I've got a couple of questions personally as a person who is involved in the finances of organisations. Gents, What are you seeing at the moment in terms of what's happening in ESG? Give us some background on what's the current state of play.
Thanks, John. Jim here. What we're seeing in the market at the moment with ESG is a rapid, development of ESG as a topic. And certainly we're seeing a huge momentum shift towards ESG being a real consideration and an expectation for companies, not just within their organisations, but certainly outside. So whether that's investors, banks, society in general, customers, all stakeholders are now looking at ESG as a really important part of decision making, and certainly an important part of behaviour. And then when we link in the finances and the access to capital, we're just seeing a big momentum shift towards ESG being something that companies are considering now, not in the future. And certainly speaking for myself, and I'll certainly throw over to Paul, this time last year we were 1 year into Parvate, so early 2021, we were seeing companies saying, yeah, we'll get to that next, we'll get to that when we need to. 2022 came across, started to get a bit more interest, a bit more urgency, I guess, to understand this better. And now that we're into early 2023, we're seeing companies start to go, it's now time to really engage in this and get some solid data behind us.
Is that because of the Paris Agreement and what's happening in Europe in terms of, so in 2023, 50,000 organisations are mandated to report on ESG, so that's the, I don't have a lot of information on this, but what's the feeling about some of that stuff?
Yeah, Paul here, thanks John. Look, we've seen a massive shift towards, obviously from climate change, COP27, etc. The change in...
What's COP27?
Well, what is COP27? It was an event that brought the world's important people together to work out how do we reduce the globe heating, basically.
Right.
And so, in a sense, the climate change, how do we support stopping it heating at a rapid rate? Carbon emissions, carbon zero, net zero, all these targets have become a big part of ESG.
Right.
On top of that, I guess the other part in recent years has been COVID. And so the social people part has risen within that as well. So and how do we look after people so that the governance, social and environmental pieces have been enhanced over probably the last 2 to 3 years, almost exponentially in terms of relevance, and everyone is aware of it. And so ESG as a part of your organisation is really important at the moment.
Yeah, I've absolutely seen that at board level, and I've certainly been to a couple of meetings where every board member has said, what are we doing about that, and putting it on the strategic agenda. I guess the other thing is the net zero carbon emission. Can you just explain that to me a little bit, because I've read bits and pieces, but so the goal is it, what year is it that we're talking about that needs to be net zero, or is that?
Yeah, I'll just jump in there. I think the idea of the COP27 and you guys have mentioned it is to try and set some realistic, attainable targets. And I guess what we're seeing is yes, we can put a year on it. I think 2050, 2030. Some people are saying 2070. Certainly, you look at China. They may be looking at 2070. I think in Australia, hopefully 2030, more likely 2050. So these dates are changing, and they'll continue to change, and that's to be expected. I think there's a massive sort of emphasis on technology helping us get there. So a lot of there are unknowns in how we're actually going to get to net zero, and there's quite a lot of skepticism around it. And I certainly understand the skepticism. We deal with it day in, day out, and no one's really sure how we're going to get there. Something we notice as an organisation, though, whether it's environmental disclosures, people, culture, governance, it's about understanding what it is and setting up some realistic targets and some methods for getting there. It's all well and good to say, Parvate are going to be net zero next year, but realistically, there's got to be a lot more thought go into it, and you've got to keep your business running. You've got to maintain a number of employees and staff, and there's a lot more considerations than just cutting emissions. It's a pattern of behaviour. It's a way of doing things that we're all trying to figure out. And I think it's really difficult for organisations to do that without an understanding of the topic and an understanding of how we're going to do it better. So, there's a lot of I think it was 2030 was the first target, and then COP25, COP26, COP27. We're not a lot closer than what we were a few years ago, because we're just seeing technology maybe not keep up in the rate that we thought it might do.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that sort of leads me into my next thought is how does that affect me? So being in the accounting profession and in that area, I mean, what impact is that going to have on reporting? What am I going to have to do? Personally, am I still going to be able to buy diesel at the pump? That for the family truckster, that sort of stuff. So, how do we? I guess I've already made that into two different questions, but
no, I understand. Yeah. I think as an accountant or as a CFO or as a company secretary, that's the person within an organisation we deal with the most.
Right.
This is being considered another or a compliance type risk or opportunity for a company. You accountants and CFOs and COSECs are very good at your spreadsheets, as we've noticed, and are very impressed daily by those. And as much as it's there is a lot of the words and numbers out there, it is going down to the COSECs, CFOs, and these type of people to measure this data, collect this data. And something we're noticing is if we can help these people collate this data, or at least know what they need to collate, that at least gives a good start on this process. So as an accountant, John, I have to say you're probably going to have to add in another couple of columns onto your spreadsheet.
Oh, I love those columns. Paul, did you have anything to add to that at all?
No, well, I think that, there is actually, yes. The compliance piece is where we start, but what we also want to do is help organisations get beyond compliance. I think that's, if you ask what the philosophy of Parvate was, it was beyond compliance. What do we do for the right reasons, at the right time, etc. So not just about ticking the boxes, but about actually living some of these parts of helping people and planet improve for societal benefit.
Yeah, and certainly agree there with Paul. I mean, one of our catch phrases was it's add value beyond compliance.
Right.
ESG is a compliance industry, but there is more value to be added. And I just the second part of your question about diesel at the pumps. We're going to see the price go up.
Right.
We've already seen the price go up. I don't think there's any getting away from it, and that's certainly part of the TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. Part of that is allowing for the cost of doing business to go up in the future, and based on climate change, and one of the things that happens with climate change is access to energy and access to things that produce emissions are going to be more expensive, because companies need to either offset them or find a way of doing them cheaper, better, with less emissions. So the cost of things like fossil fuels is no doubt going to increase.
You've just put a spanner in my 5-year plan, but okay, thanks. So what do you gents see next on the horizon? Is there something noteworthy?
I think certainly what I'm seeing, and Paul will jump in a sec here, what I'm seeing, like I mentioned at the start, what's next is a lot of people are starting to understand that this is something that needs to be done. We have daily meetings and weekly meetings with accounting firms, legal firms, banks, ESG sort of funds that we have linked in-house, which we're very fortunate about and very excited about. And this is now a consideration day to day. So I think what's going to happen next is going to grow even more momentum. And I think what we're seeing is companies that are living it in their day-to-day lives, in their day-to-day business practice, are going to have a huge advantage over those that wait, and then trying to sort of panic and cobble together an ESG report when it does become mandated as, you do it, or, you're getting threatened with various regulatory or financial penalties. So I think we're going to see the companies that are really on the front foot with this are going to see a natural performance increase, and they're also going to see that they're quite desirable to staff.
Right. I think there's in a general sense, there's a mindset shift to think about these things more and take them into account when making decisions. And that can be for an organisation, but I think ultimately the role of ESG performance is for every individual to improve their own. Often you start with yourself first in your own backyard to improve things. So I think that's an important part of ESG, is that it's not just big organisations, although they have obviously an important role because they have a lot of emissions potentially. They have a lot of staff, but ultimately within that those staff individuals get to make decisions on who they work for, what they do, and how they do it.
One final question then, at the risk of stretching your predictive capacities, how do you see the impact on the average person? Do you think this will be an improvement? I mean, obviously saving the planet's an important one, and having a planet to live on is pretty important, but for people in their day-to-day lives, what sort of obvious impacts are going to roll out of the back of this? I mean, you've spoken broadly about improvements to employment conditions, those sorts of things, and I think, obviously the psychology and looking after people better, having organisations accountable will be an improvement. Is there anything else that you can see there that's readily identifiable as a thing that might be useful for just people in general?
I think something I've certainly seen, having been to a lot of conferences on climate change and various other things as well, is this is going to become part of day-to-day life. We are going to have to make better decisions on most things we do, whether it's catching a train rather than driving, or recycling properly, or taking a keep cup out with you when you get a coffee. So I think in day-to-day life for the average person, it's just going to be making better decisions more often. And I think like Paul mentioned and you've mentioned, big organisations have got a lot to do here, and obviously cutting down emissions and workplace conditions and supply chain and all these things that we cover are certainly something that can be done at a large scale. But certainly us as individuals, if we can make more good decisions, and every little decision adds up, that's going to be the thing that certainly has this cultural shift towards a better way of doing business, a better way of living, and certainly longevity in a company, in the planet, and also in relationships. So I think my view is, if we can all make better decisions more often, we'll be okay. If we wait to try and make a really big decision at the last minute, it's probably going to become a little bit more difficult.
That pragmatic approach, I think, is important. Smaller organisations may say, well, what effect are we going to have? We're just a smaller organisation, we're just an individual. But obviously we know you put a number of those together, and that can change the course of how things occur. So I think it doesn't matter what size you are, whether you're a big conglomerate or a small individual sole trader, etc. You can make changes to improve things for people and planet.
Wonderful. All right, thanks for your time today, guys. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, John.
Appreciate that. If you are interested in what you've heard today, please follow us and like us. If you've got any comments or questions, please leave them as well. Thanks for your time, and look forward to catching up again with you soon. The content of this podcast is intended to be general in nature and is not personal financial product advice. It does not address the circumstances of any individual or entity. You should not construe any of this information or other part of the material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other professional advice. Parvate is not a financial advisor. You should consider seeking independent legal, financial, taxation, or other advice to check how any information relates to your unique circumstances. Nothing contained in the podcast constitutes a solicitation, recommendation, endorsement, or offer by Parvate or any third-party service provider to buy or sell any securities or other financial instruments in this or any other jurisdiction in which solicitation or offer would be unlawful under the securities laws of such jurisdiction.